more analysis on this, we can speak to John Blaxland. He's the professor and acting head of strategic and defence studies at Centre at the Australian National University in Canberra. Mr. Blaxland, thanks very much for joining us on TRT World. Now, we heard just there from Mark Kimmett saying that he thinks this might be the beginning of something. Earlier in the programme, we heard from Lawrence Korb, another former US administration official, saying that this was just a one-off strike. What's your assessment of the Trump administration, this action that they've taken in the last few hours?
Look, this is a vertigo-inducing change in foreign policy. We saw the United States president, while he was on the campaign hustings last year, talking about only America first, indicating an isolationist tendency for his foreign policy outlook. We've seen since he's taken office a globalist president emerge, one very much looking to step out of the shadows of President Obama with the legacy of the so-called red line and the failure to respond to the red line. And that is understandable given the heart-wrenching pictures that have emerged from Syria with the use of chemical weapons that appear to be linked to the Assad regime. And the application of force, the precise strikes on military aircraft at the Syrian military airfield in western Syria speaks to an approach that the Trump administration seems to be taking of upping the ante. But what is disconcerting, particularly disconcerting in this instance, is while Russia might have been told and allies such as Turkey and maybe Australia have been consulted in terms of being advised, this is a unilateralist action by a president that is taking steps that seems to be really moving without a clear strategy. Now, what is particularly worrying is about how Russia might respond. We know that Russia has a vested interest in the Assad regime. Why? Because they have the sea and air bases on the Mediterranean coast that are vital to Russia's perceived interests operating in the Mediterranean, in the Middle East, and off the southern coast of Europe. That is something the Russians do not want to back away from. And if Trump pushes further on this, will generate a reaction. Interestingly, the mood in Washington towards Russia has shifted, in part because of what's been happening in Congress, the concern about people like Mike Flynn, who was removed from being the national security advisor. The dynamics are really proving very difficult for Trump to operate constructively with Russia. And so there seems to be a cooling here, and there's no clear strategy being outlined that we can see, except when we look at what's happening at Mar-a-Lago, and we know there that President Xi Jinping is meeting with President Trump, and there seems to be something in the timing of the message here. It's very convenient for him to have this on the other side of the world, but affecting Xi's thinking, particularly about North Korea and the handling of the North Korean nuclear question. So the implications are grave. They're really international. And the United States, if it wants to proceed effectively in this space, needs to get other countries in the coalition to understand and work lockstep and hopefully get Russia engaged constructively and to have buy-in in the solution.
Okay, Professor Blaxland, you call it a worrying development. I think the Australian Prime Minister has come out this morning saying this was a proportionate response. Donald Trump did say that he was able to get a sort of a coalition of the willing together to back him in doing this response. And you mentioned 2013 when the Obama administration didn't cross that red line. Many people at that time were calling for Bashar al-Assad to be given a bloody nose. Isn't that what Donald Trump has done here? Has warned the president that that's the action he will take. As you rightly mentioned, as also a further warning to people in North Korea.
Indeed, it is. But what we need to remember is there are some good reasons why Obama didn't step over that line. I think the mistake was drawing the line in the first place without being in a position to have a campaign plan and a strategy that involved Russia, that involved the other players involved, in a long-term plan that would see this not just be a hiccup or the potential trigger for some, stirring up of the situation so that it degenerates even further. We don't know where this will end. Now, hopefully Russia will exercise restraint in how it responds, but this is something that Putin may see as really a challenge that he wants to respond to. And so while in terms of the Trumpian art of the deal equation, if you like, this may seem like a clever move, let's hope it is. But there's some disconcerting indicators that this is a superficial response, an emotional response to crisis that will have potentially knock-on consequences that we'll all live to regret.
And just finally then, Professor Blaxland, what could those knock-on consequences be? Of course, this attack isn't going to stop the Syrian regime from carrying out its attacks in different parts of the country, continuing the war in Syria. Of course, it doesn't knock out Daesh in northern Syria. So what consequences could then ensue following what Donald Trump put in motion this morning?
Well, the main reaction is from what Russia might do. And this is the great unknown. It's very uncertain at the moment, unclear just how Putin will respond to this set of circumstances. And of course, what Xi Jinping in Mar-a-Lago and when he returns to China, how he will respond to this assertiveness from Trump. Now, on one level, you can see that this is something that's driven by a desire to put the United States on the front foot and put Russia on the back foot, Assad on the back foot, and send a message to China about America's willingness to be proactively engaged in addressing issues it sees as untenable, including potentially North Korea. The question is how those powers respond. Do they respond seeing that as that signalling and respond by backing off? Or does this generate a similar emotional response from Putin or someone else in the Ukraine, potentially in the Baltics or somewhere else? Now, here's hoping sanity will prevail. But this is a very provocative move that does raise considerable concerns. While on many levels it is perfectly defendable and understandable that given the moral outrage of what's happened, the United States reacts forcefully with precision. But given the geostrategic dynamics at work, I'm concerned that this one hasn't been thought through fully.
OK, very interesting analysis. Professor John Blaxland from the Australian National University, thanks for joining us.